Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Ross McGill. Welcome to our EdTechX Spotlight event in partnership with Wacom. As education moves further away from times of the pandemic and closer to a new normal, I'm delighted to be joined by 5 amazing teachers from across the globe to discuss how to optimize active learning, work in a remote teaching context, discuss the challenges and the successes that we've all had to experience as we adapt to an online environment. And I hope that you will find lots of wisdom throughout this session, hear some of the stories from our experts, and we'll navigate through the conversation and talk about some of the successes, the challenges, digital classroom, remote teaching, etc. And what we're also going to do throughout the session is offer a Wacom One device later on. So stay tuned and we'll introduce that competition as we go through. And I'm really looking forward to unpicking some of the wisdom from our colleagues. So what I'd like to do first of all is, before I go into our kind of questions, I'd like to just ask each of our presenters who are on the panel just to introduce themselves, just tell everybody what you do, and then we'll come back to everyone in order and go through our kind of discussion over the next 60, 80 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask if Maryellen can come in first, just to introduce herself to everybody, tell us more about your role, what you do, and then I'll move on to James, Carla, Kieran and Deanna, all in that order. So if I can hand over to Maryellen first, could you just say hello to everybody and tell everyone what you do?
Hello, everyone. My name is Maryellen. I'm in the Department of Biology at MIT, and I'm a director of online and blended learning initiatives and a lecturer in the department in digital learning. And since 2013, I've been in the department because I came back to the department to oversee the MOOC development and those projects. And since that project, we've always tried to have significant impact on campus with the digital learning projects that were for MIT students. And then in the past year, what I've been involved with is really all the courses for the entire department, and then, you know, talking with other groups across campus about what we do to have this transition to remote learning.
Thank you, Maryellen. So it'd be great to unpick some of your wisdom and experience at MIT, particularly the research perspective, which is going to be useful to us all. I'm going to ask if James can come on the line now and just introduce yourself, James, to our listeners. Tell us a little bit more about your experience, and then we'll come back to you in terms of what's been working for you over the last 12 months. So, James.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is James Mutton. I'm Deputy Head Digital Innovation and Curriculum at Putney High School. It's a girls' day school in London, part of the Girls' Day School Trust. My role has been to lead the school in digital innovation. I'm responsible for the timetable and the curriculum. And we've been working really hard during COVID to make sure that we're still able to deliver our amazing curriculum online and give the girls, the students, an incredible opportunity in those lessons. And it has been tough, and I'm really looking forward to sharing ideas and also hearing how my other colleagues across the world have also been grappling with these same issues.
Thank you, James. And we've got a classic example there. James got a young child in the background, so you'll hear James is managing what we've all had to face, working from home and lockdown. So James, it'd be really good to see how we navigate this discussion with those challenges that we all face. Thank you, James. Carla, I'm going to bring you in next. To just introduce yourself to our listeners, tell us what you do and the expertise that you can offer.
Hi everyone, I'm Carla. I've been involved in EdTech and education for quite a long time. I've developed EdTech products. I work a lot with startups and do a lot of mentoring. And I've also been active in sort of learning science and research. So most recently, I actually ran a kind of think tank that brought different stakeholders in education together around the use of technologies in education and learning. And I also kind of set up a small community network that sort of is interdisciplinary around learning and education, looking at different facets of learning and education, including EdTech, brain, mind, and education, interdisciplinarity, research, all sorts of things. This is free for everyone to join. It's called Refracted, and that's sort of what I've been doing more recently, as well as mentoring and working with a lot of startups and doing ad hoc projects. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Carla. So it'd be really interesting to unpick your wisdom. For many people, moving to remote learning will be new, but yourself and a few others will be able to share your wisdom. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. I'm going to introduce Kieran next. Hello, Kieran, can you introduce yourself? Tell everybody what you do.
Hi, everyone. Myself, Dr. Kieran Nair. I am working as the Associate Professor for Marketing as well as the Program Director for MBA at Abu Dhabi School of Management. So we are based out of Abu Dhabi in UAE, and we offer master programs. I think we are one of the first universities in this region who shifted to online mode without any break. I think we shifted from an online to offline to online in 2 weeks' time. I think the infrastructure it's amazing in this part of the world, which help us to transition to the online mode. And now still it's like a year we are doing online teaching on master level. And we hope to continue this going forward, as we feel it as a great opportunity to, get students across from different regions in the Middle East. So we are looking forward to have a great online blended learning model going forward. So, and looking forward to hear from other panelists what's in online learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. So that's what it's all about. Good ideas filtered to the top. So we've all got something to offer here, and we're all going to share our ideas. And at some point, we'll ask for questions and things like that later on. Finally, to Deanna. Deanna, are you there? And could you introduce yourself to everybody? Tell everyone what you do.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually a technology and STEAM teacher in Hazlitt Township in New Jersey, United States. And I've been doing it for the past 5 years, a little bit longer at the school. But basically my role, in addition to teaching the kids about new technology and kind of immersing them with lessons, is acting as the school-based technology like integration specialist, and kind of helping teachers kind of pivot from where we were, prior to a year ago with normal instruction to full-fledged like remote or hybrid learning. So it's just like everyone's been saying, it's definitely been a transition, but basically delivering PDs and helping teachers and students just in general with navigating their online kind of environment. That's basically part of my role, in addition to just teaching in general.
Thank you, Deanna. So there you go, everyone. A good breadth and depth of experience and wisdom from lots of corners of the globe. Just context from me, I've been a teacher 27 years, working remotely. I've been doing webinars for teacher training for a good decade. So I'll kind of unpick some of the things that I've seen on my travels to schools around the world, but also in the remote context over the last 12 months also. So let's face it, we've all had a bit of challenge over the last 12 months, but there's been lots of successes. So just as a kind of reminder to everyone why we're here, we want to just unpick some of our experiences and the successes and the challenges, as well as best practice prior to the pandemic, as well as throughout, and what's emerging, those good ideas filtering to the top. And then think about what opportunities it presents for us going forward, and a kind of future outlook in the new normal. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pose a question. We've got quite a few to get through, and I'm going to bring all the presenters in at various points, and then different people for specific questions. So the first question is, how did we manage, thrive, survive online teaching during the pandemic? And with everyone with their different roles, be interesting to see how we've adapted in different contexts. So just for speakers, if you could just maybe introduce again your specific role and your particular role with adults or children on a day-to-day basis, and how you've adapted yourself, but also maybe how your organization has adapted. So a lot of questions there. So let's just pop back to Maryellen. Maryellen, how did you manage, survive, thrive throughout the last 12 months?
Yeah, really, I think it comes down to experience and people. And at MIT, we were lucky that we had a lot of experience with MIT OpenCourseWare for 20 years, and we had asynchronous online courses with the MOOCs that we've been developing since around 2012. So luckily, we had people embedded in departments like myself, and we were already doing this work. So when everyone had to transition to remote learning very quickly, then that led to everyone turning to us to really guide them through this. Although, our projects were very different because we had to, what we normally did was build a course for, let's say, 6 months to put out as an asynchronous online course. And then what they needed to do is within 2 weeks, start delivering synchronous lessons. So there was a lot of change there, a lot of new tools being introduced. Everyone was really busy, for this past year and continues to do so, but it's definitely gotten easier now when everyone has gotten used to the new systems and new policies and all of that. So I think the learners I used to interact with and still do are really the MOOC learners that are people around the world from every age group. And I've always interacted with the MIT students as well, but before they were taking on-campus courses and they didn't really know who I was as much. I was more behind the scenes, and I think I'm not necessarily more visible, but I'm involved in a lot of courses, helping out and jumping in when they need guidance and how to do things at this stage.
Maryellen, could I just ask, what was if we go back a year ago, March 2020, what was the initial pain point? If you're already doing online courses, were you fully prepared?
No, I mean, nobody was fully prepared to just immediately jump into synchronous. So we had courses that may have been everybody at MIT before, they didn't do online 4-credit courses. So everybody had some in-person component of their course. We may have had websites with for a hybrid experience, but they didn't have completely online experiences. So really at a central level, MIT got together getting licenses to new tools, and being ready to deliver in that mode. And we transitioned our LMS even over this past year. So it was a lot of change. And I think really just the being ready and being able to do that was just having people willing to just jump in and be like, okay, we'll start having training sessions. We'll jump in and help people out and have meetings with them to talk through every aspect of the course. How will they work with TAs? How will they run these recitations? How will they run their classroom teaching? And I think the challenges for a lot of our teachers really was about tablets and pens, and they were used to writing on boards, and really that hurdle of getting to think about how will I do all of this board work on in a remote classroom. They really had to learn what it was like to use a tablet and a pen and think about that.
So the words there stand out for me, having people jump in. That seems to be how, not just in education, but in lots of different industries as we responded to the pandemic, a lot of people jumping in to help and get equipped, whether it's laptop distribution or, just general things across society. So that's a standout kind of word for me. Thank you, Maryellen. I'm going to bring in James now. James, your life as a deputy head in a school in London. Tell us your pinch point back in March and how you've adapted in your school community, and what have been some of those challenges and successes?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I suppose one of our biggest challenges was that, in London, we were in school on the Friday and we were remote on the Monday, as were thousands of other schools. And actually on the first day, the virtual learning environment we used failed. So all of the work that we'd been putting online in preparation for a likely lockdown, we couldn't access. And thankfully they were able to work their magic and get their servers back up and running really quickly, so that we were able to continue with that we'd done. And I suppose lockdown for us has been or remote learning has been in 3 phases. We had the March through to the end of the summer lockdown, the first one, and that's the point where the students and the teachers were all learning how to do things online. We had experience of using Microsoft Teams. We'd had experience of using tablets and pens in a real life format, but not necessarily remotely. And so a lot of that time was learning from our mistakes. And failure is something that I'm really passionate about talking about, because it's from our mistakes that we learn. And people say failure, first attempt in learning, but I feel personally too often we gloss over those failures and don't accept them as part of our progress. But what we've really tried hard to do when we came back to school in September is make sure that we were future ready for another lockdown. And our head has been amazing at kind of predicting and always maintaining that contingency, and making sure that my fellow deputies and all of our colleagues are ready in the event. And luckily, we came back to school in January for a day, and then it was back into lockdown. And at that point, we were ready, and didn't miss a beat because of the preparation we put in. And I think it's testament to all of my colleagues and the students, but the effort that they've put into making themselves ready to learn new skills, to be resilient, to adapt resources. So yeah, they've been fab. And I think the challenge, you mentioned challenge, when you have students in the room in front of you, and that's what we love and live and breathe, is the interaction with humans in a room. And when you've got some students who can't be there because they're isolated, because they've been stuck in another part of the country or another part of the world when lockdown was imposed, it's that balance between teaching a lesson. We call it hybrid learning, where you've got some students in school and some students not in school who are dialing in on a tablet or a computer. And that's been a big challenge, but one that I think that we've done very well at. I think we've done well at it, but we're really glad to be back at the moment, and fingers crossed that stays. School in person.
So, James, I guess that popping back to you mentioned resilience and failure and things, and when your server collapsed, what's your kind of backup plan now if that happened? What have you learned from that experience, and how can your school adapt in case something like that happened again?
Well, so it's a good question. So on that first day, we recognised lockdown was coming, but not necessarily what format or exactly when. So we'd uploaded lots of PowerPoint, lots of work for students access in an asynchronous, and if they can't access it, then it's useless. So we were able to circumvent in that instance resources that way. But now we've moved on to Teams, or we use that more often. We were then able to deliver in a live fashion. And so that then takes out the reliance on the servers there. And I suppose that yes, you run the risk that if you're with Microsoft, it's if you're having a problem, everyone else is having a problem. So
sure. So thank you, James. We were just losing a little bit of the connection there, but fingers crossed we all got through. The importance of having that plan B. So thank you, James. I'll pop back to you in a moment. Carla, I'm going to bring you in here. In your context, with your wisdom and how you work, I guess that macro level, what have you seen work really well in your own breadth of experience, and what have been the challenges, if we recap 12 months ago to where we are now?
Okay, I'll sort of talk about a couple of scenarios. The first one is I became, and I've never stopped being a learner anyway, but I took an online course at Harvard Extension School in Mind, Brain and Education and Health. And that was a fully online remote learning course with people from all over the world. Now, that was an incredible experience. For me, it was as good, if not better, than a live course experience that I, sort of witnessed before. And partly, or probably fully, the reason for that is that the pedagogy and the sort of scaffolding and the thinking that went into bringing that delivery of that course online was absolutely exceptional. And it's the best kind of pedagogical thinking and online delivery thinking that I've seen, that I've witnessed myself. So from that perspective, the remote learning for me, an unbelievable success. On the other hand, I've also seen other stories, and I'll come to that in a minute. But then the second thing I wanted to highlight is I've done a lot of kind of mentoring and workshops and boot camps and all sorts of things over the past year, obviously because we were in lockdown. And those experiences vary. I find the sort of mentoring is typically okay because you're pretty much one-to-one or one-to a couple. Sometimes the workshops, though, I think are so much better in person because you get very little response from the audience, and it's very hard to kind of orchestrate the workshop if you haven't sort of met the people before. Having said that, again, they tended to go quite well because people are really engaged and want to do this, and they realize, okay, we must make the best of a maybe not the ideal situation. Now, the other side of the equation is a slightly different scenario, which has proven to be much more difficult. And I was asked to do a workshop and some mentoring for nonprofits and NGOs in Eastern and Southern Europe, working in kind of socioeconomic poverty and also in refugee context. And of course, then the story becomes very, very different because there's nothing there or very little there. So, some people have got a mobile phone, someone may have a tablet, but very little access to the internet. And in the camps, people have got virtually nothing, to say nothing. And one of the camps even burned down in Greece, whilst I was working with one of the organizations. So there it was a completely different scenario because there you're sort of trying to kind of find solutions and work around to do as much as you can with virtually nothing. And you find that you sort of looking at scenarios where you sort of think, God, I wish I could have done that differently, or I could have given different advice because, pedagogically, maybe what I'm doing doesn't really stack up that much, but it's the only thing we can do. And that was a really stark experience because obviously I work in EdTech all the time, and you sort of are always looking at the high end of technology. Luckily, I've done some work in Africa and developing world before, so I knew that it's not just about the high end. And also, parts of the UK, the technology provision is very little, as we've all found out. But it was very stark. It was, we kind of bank too much on having the technology and don't think enough about actually what to do with it and what to do if we haven't got a lot of it. And that became very, very obvious to me. And then the last scenario is actually I'm a governor in a rural, tiny little school in the UK. And there it was primary school. There what happened was that because there was a lack of infrastructure and lack of laptops and devices for kids to do remote learning at home, the first lockdown, kids got very little access to learning at all. They got their worksheets delivered. Parents could kind of get them via email. But equally, there was quite a lot of disparity in terms of who had access and who didn't have access. And whilst the school did a sterling job in terms of trying to make sure that all the kids had something, it proved very, very difficult, partly because also the parents didn't really know what to do and how to deal with this. So kind of really different scenarios, and some quite successful, some very successful, and then others obviously much harder in terms of, the preparedness and the kind of technology access and also digital acumen of people in terms of educational context of what happened. And what I've also witnessed is that in a lot of cases we started to regress. So rather than having pedagogical models where things were far more interactive in the classroom, it became much more of front of class teaching again, and kids spending hours in front of their screen filling in worksheets. So not the kind of ideal scenario of teaching and learning that you would like, but people desperately trying to make the best of it, and parents also trying to kind of do what was best for their kids, and to make sure that the kids were learning something, if not, what they were meant to be learning. So yeah, quite disparate scenarios.
Yes, thank you, Carla. Quite broad and very fascinating. I think I'll come back to you later and probably add an additional question. If I could put you in a corner, what would be the hallmarks of a good online course? But I will hold that one for now. I'm going to bring Kieran in next. Kieran, in your part of the world, in Dubai, what have been the challenges, with your position in your organization and whether you were ready or not a year ago? Could you just give us a little summary of how you responded, the challenges, how you've adapted?
Yeah, I think this part of the world, initially we were not expecting a lockdown, and it was all of a sudden the lockdown was announced, and most of the universities here is governed by the ministry, and they have given a guideline that within 2 weeks you guys need to go online. So it becomes like a real challenge because none of our universities have experience of online teaching or online learning. And most of the faculties working in my organization, including me, never taught online. So it was a major challenge. I think that's what the initial discussions we were having, that how are we going to overcome, what are the ways options available in terms of there is Zoom, there is Acrobat Reader, there is in terms of MS Teams, Google. Then finally we decided to go for Microsoft Teams. And again, the initial challenges was basically to see that the software what we are going to use was compatible with the students as well as the faculties. The infrastructure should be supporting that. Luckily, in this part of the world, we have the best internet connection, the speed. So that was not a challenge. So the challenge we identified initially was basically, are the faculties trained to take online classes? And our university, as I told you, is basically more oriented towards master education. We do have our classes 5 hours. Each session is 5 hours of class. So teaching online on 5 hours is a real challenge. When you're in the classroom, you have enough breaks, you get a chance to have a lot of discussions in the class. But online was a pretty new mode. So even starting redoing the class materials. And initially, we had 1 week of class. We took it from the office to really see what sort of challenges, and to have an IT support team always next to us to show that if there's any problem, we can sort it out. Luckily, the students, being the master level students and they're working professionals, their IT knowledge was really high. So there was no issue in terms of students getting into the system. But the challenge was for the faculties to teach for 5 hours. The materials what they prepare needs to be really, really long. And then you realize that the students are not necessarily online in terms of having the cameras off. So the faculties are left with some blank screen. They look and speak. So the engagement level was going down. And then, so multiple training sessions was conducted, how to bring in active learning activities within the class, so that, we can get more engagement from the students itself. So those challenges, I think every semester we were having at least a couple of trainings. We participated in multiple webinars, how to have interactive classrooms, how to have interactive assessments, how to have interactive learning, how to bring in more technology into the teaching. We thought about, rather than just giving a PowerPoint presentation and making it boring, and bring in more video content, bringing in more, we created breakout sessions, group discussions, polls. So I think it was more about brainstorming. So every faculty will come with something new, and then we see the impact. And if it is making sense, then immediately we have, monthly meetings, and we talk about the best practices. And then we teach each other. So it was basically a faculty supporting another faculty. So that helped us to overcome these challenges. And now I think now every faculty is now, they're very much tuned in taking online classes. We somehow manage, we are surviving. And what we hear is that this is going to continue for the next 6 months here. So I think that's become like a normal norm. Faculties are really, really, fine-tuned.
You're in a much stronger position, and that sharing of knowledge is helping you be in a stronger position.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'll come back and I'll unpick that a little bit further, the teacher training aspect, Kieran. Deanna, finally I'm going to ask you to come in and just talk about the transition a year ago, your successes, the kind of failures, and where you are today.
Yes, thank you. Really, kind of to, repeat a lot of what James and Carla and Kieran said, I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen at my level anyway, has been like to keep kids, motivated and engaged online. And I think my district is, at least I think it's a fifth through 12th grade is a one-to-one district, meaning that they do get their own devices provided by the school and they get to take them home. So for us, pivoting from last year, that wasn't really a challenge, but just to look at all of the tools as teachers that we've been using to kind of assess whether or not those two tools going forward are actually keeping the kids engaged, and if they're, used for the best practices, and kind of reassessing, like Kieran said, like every month or so, kind of having our team meetings with our teachers and seeing, like, what are we doing that's working and what isn't. I think one of the benefits that we've realized over the last year is that things that we've been using, we can kind of, because they're not in-person textbooks, it's not as, as far as like a budgetary concern in schools, most of these programs and everything that we have access to online, we use, a lot of tools, and we're able to kind of test them out how they are in real time with the students and teachers, and to see, which ones going forward will provide the best instruction. Or enhance our instruction. Really, I think one of the other challenges was kind of moving from being able to be in person with the students and having them form groups to collaborate and discuss what we were learning and do projects. And I think that was a big change from being in person to going remote, or just transitioning to digital or hybrid, because we right now, we started the year having students either decide to stay home and they were remote, or they could come back into school. So my district gave them the option. So we as teachers had half of our kids online and half of our kids in person. So just having them still have the positive school experience, even besides all of the emotional aspects of the pandemic going on. So I think one of the challenges is just kind of keeping them positive about school and about learning, and making sure that the learning curve with the technology isn't interfering with that, that drive to keep the kids, engaged and, want to be in school.
Thank you, Jenna. You made a really important point about the kind of social emotional aspects of the pandemic and learning, and really interesting about the kind of group dynamics, the half in and half out. So what I want to do, everybody, is talk about your own experiences. Now, I want to speed things up. We're half an hour in, and I want you to pick one challenge that you've personally had to face that matches the people around you in terms of how they faced remote teaching. So if I can get you to narrow it down to one issue, whether it's marking online, and explain why. And I want you to be super punchy. If you can take a minute each, that would be great. So I'll come back to Maryellen first. What's been your personal challenge?
I think the one challenge that we could overcome that we haven't talked about before is that a lot of people wanted to do online exams, and they really just had no clue how would they even go about this, because everything was on paper before. And at MIT, we really focus on problem solving and more open-ended thinking. So they didn't want to just simplify assessments to that level. So what we tried to do, we had a lot of MOOC experience in that realm, so that we could run strategies that were really similar to how we would run an assessment in a summative assessment in a MOOC, and having a 24-hour window period, because we had our MIT students in all different time zones, having still allowing a timed exam, and not minimizing the worry of cheating, because one, just trusting the students, and two, being able to design the exams so that you have assessments that are more authentic and minimize the risk for cheating.
Perfect. So that, the exam debate has been a huge part of the pandemic also. So thank you, Maryellen. James, how about you? What's been your personal challenge? Maybe having a young one teaching from home is one of them, but without putting words in your mouth, what has it been for you?
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was lucky that for the first part of the first lockdown, I was with my parents, and that was a huge help. And now I'm at home with my wife and my little daughter, and it's that balance of being able to do your job that you want to do really well. As a deputy head, I still teach class. I teach geography, but I also have lots of other meetings and responsibilities. And it's being able to balance the responsibilities to your home, your personal life, with the responsibilities to your professional life, and being connected and being available so easily. And you yourself, Ross, you were speaking to Brazil before you were speaking to us here, and there's no commuting for you, so you're always online, you're always available. And it's that challenge of as a teacher being disciplined about making those work-life boundaries, and also as a participant, not expecting, and a participant as a student or a parent or a teacher, expecting your teaching colleagues or the people who are educating your children to also be available all the time. So I think we're a lot better at that now, but that was hard.
That mental health story is important for us all. I've 3 days of conferences in Brazil and then hopping onto this one, which has been really interesting already. So that mental health and balance and family challenges we all face. So thank you, James. Carla, to you in a minute, could you sum up what's been your personal challenge?
I think the personal challenge is probably quite a bit of Zoom fatigue, what you just highlighted. But one thing I think I want to highlight is sort of observing how the social fabric of learning in a lot of cases may have suffered. But I think there's also a huge opportunity, because I believe that EdTech is ideally placed to help with that, and to help with the construction of learning using a social fabric and social support. And so that for me is the biggest thing, is kind of how we bring the social element into learning in these kind of scenarios where in many cases that wasn't entirely possible.
Do you mean by social fabric the kind of support around the child?
Yeah, and also, education and learning are actually very social things. So you tend to learn a lot from your peers. You tend to learn because you're surrounded by other people, and so that sort of losing those connections, I think, have played quite a significant part.
Important to us all, hasn't it? So, Kieran, what about you? What's been your personal challenge? If you can sum up the kind of key one for you in the next minute, that would be great.
Yes, as I told you, like our classes are mostly 5 hours to 7 hours a day class. So I think the long duration classes with you not able to see the student, basically now I told you I'm from UAE, the culture plays a very important role. So mostly the female students, they tend to keep the cameras off, and then that makes an excuse for all the guys to also keep the cameras off. So when you're literally looking at the blank screen for 5 hours to make sure that you are engaging with the students and you get the attention and the concentration from the students, I think that's the most important challenge myself as well as my fellow colleagues are basically facing, to make sure that they're actively listening and they're responding. So that's the challenge, which I must say, to keep the class more engaged, or to get a feedback and make everyone concentrated on you for a long class. That's something which we've been facing as a challenge.
Thank you, Kieran. So that, that constant connection online for 5-7 hours a day, mentally exhausting. Deanna, how about you? What's been your personal challenge?
I mean, similar. I think just, of course, keeping the students engaged and motivated. It's very easy on a Zoom call to kind of fly it under the radar and like Kieran said, blank out the screen. And I think whereas when you're in person, you can physically go up to the child or the student and just kind of say like, okay, are you okay? Or, do you need help with this? Whereas sometimes if they're completely checked out, that's been a hurdle that I know so many teachers have faced, just to make sure, especially at our age level. But then I think also just not even having, like at our level, not even having so much as to whether or not the students are cheating or anything like that. They can Google anything just by sitting at their computer. But I think just having the motivation and the grit to like keep going and keep, I think that problem solving is a little bit hindered sometimes when they're physically online all the time, just because they can search up the answer in 2 seconds. And I think just having them, giving them the capacity to sit there and want to problem solve a little bit more, whereas they have more resources in front of them where they're like, oh, we don't have to try as hard because we could just, find it in 2 seconds. So I think a combination of just keeping them motivated and keeping them wanting to learn is really what I've seen.
On that point, Deanna, that's a good one. Trying to keep kids motivated physically is hard enough. On remote learning, 5-7 hours, as Kieran's mentioned, is going to be a real challenge. I'm going to bring back James in as well as Deanna here. What new skills have you both learnt? Let's talk about you first. What could you give us one or two pearls of wisdom? So, James, what kind of new skills have you got?
I think skills that I've learned, how to deliver a PowerPoint and then record yourself with a little video in the bottom corner, narrating the PowerPoint, so that when we weren't able to teach live and we were setting cover, and normally you'd have a cover teacher going, we were still able to give that personal connection. So rather than a dry PowerPoint, it had the teacher's face. And so learning to do that, it's my job to help teachers innovate in a classroom, and someone told me, of course you know how to do that. And I was like, no, teach me. So yeah, that was my number one.
Deanna, how about you? What's the skill that you've now mastered?
Well, I'm just by nature, I'm a very organized person, but I feel like it's helped me with more time management in terms of, our days are shortened now for instructional time. So we have 4 hours as opposed to about 6. So it's getting the students to be engaged during that time, but then also knowing as a teacher, I can't, I have a shortened time frame that I'm trying to teach also. So just staying on task and staying on topic, and maybe, giving them the break that they need because they are, virtual or hybrid. So giving them the instructional things that we are, like from our curriculum, but then also giving them time to like be silly and have fun projects. That is kind of, the going back and forth with making sure that they have that balance. But yeah, I would say like skill wise, like just time management and
as you mentioned, Deanna, earlier, teaching kids that motivation, that grit, they've got tons of resources in front of them. It's easy to cheat, that type of stuff. Could you unpick maybe one thing that your students are better at now?
I would say organization, because they have, we use, we're a Google school. So we have all of those, basically all of those products and everything. They like the fact that they can edit it live, but they really, at 10 years old, they've had no other choice but to, make sure their work is all digital. So having their work filed in the right places, easy to find, that, when like adhering to due dates, whereas like I think previously they would have a binder full of things that they could possibly lose, or, had to write things in their planner. So I feel like it's giving them a little bit more responsibility. So I think just using, and then getting used to, going on to, like a Google Meet, or having them share, having them use email. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but 2 years ago, as teachers, you're like, oh, okay, well, if you have a problem, just email me. And they would never, they would never email you. But now it's like they'll email you because they know how, because they're used to it. So I think developing those skills that they're going to basically be using the rest of their lives, really, and starting earlier. So I would say just getting them,
your inbox is flooded with emails from your students. James, how about you? What have your students benefited from? What can they now master?
I think it's very similar to Deanna's students, that they've mastered the use of technology as a tool to organize themselves. I think that they're more resilient, they're better at finding an answer for themselves without just relying on one textbook or relying on the teacher. We notice that when they have their tablets in class, that they're better at multitasking. And I know that there are issues around multitasking things, but we'll have students who have their tablet on the desk. They've got the PowerPoint that you're using in front of them. They're skipping back a couple of slides to check the definition, and then they're writing in their book. So they've got more agency, I think, in a lesson. They're freer to move around the content, which I think keeps them engaged better.
Yeah.
And they use it the way that adults use it, which I think is a thing that they weren't allowed to do.
But the current generation Z, they're immersed with technology the day they're born. People my age, pushing 50. I didn't have my first mobile phone until I was 25. So the kind of Zennials will remember the internet when you click that page, and it took a couple of minutes for the web page to turn over. So let's move on. We've talked about some of the challenges. Let's talk about some of the benefits. Now, I'm going to put you all on the spot here. I want you to think of just 5 words only. Sum up what you think the benefits are of a digital classroom and remote teaching. So 5 words only each. And I'm going to come back in order. We'll start with Maryellen. So what would be your 5 words? And I don't mind if you repeat 1 or 2 words from each other, so don't think you need to come up with a new word. But what would be those 5? Maryellen, how about you? Put you on the spot.
Efficiencies, backup systems, and I was, it's hard with the 5 words, but, and being able to bring in global access.
Global access. And how about you, James? 5 words, sum up what you think the benefits are.
Accessibility, breadth, speed, collaboration, and that was 4.
That's fine. Well, we're happy with that. So we'll unpick some of kind of common themes that come up. Carla, how about you?
Digital skill development, resilience, problem solving, reach, and new modes of learning.
Thank you. We hear problem solving quite a lot, don't we? So maybe we can unpick that one a bit later. Thank you, Carla. Kieran, how about you? 5 words.
It's convenience, flexibility, efficiency, innovation, and reach.
Fantastic. And Deanna?
I think so. Quicker assessments, collaboration, boost in introverted students, and just peer mentoring.
Fantastic. So lots of kind of key words there. So we all know there's huge benefits to have in this kind of online world. It's here to stay. Whether we're all working remotely forever, fingers crossed we do get back to that physical contact too. So lots of words that I'm hearing. The design of online courses is important. The technology, the infrastructure, access to technology, the transition to online, and how students can use those skills and work independently. And that problem solving word always comes up a lot. Carla, I'm going to ask you to come in. We're going to talk about the benefits of using devices. I've got a Wacom One device here on my table with my Wacom pen. Now, I know you've got a wide lens with your research. What could you just signpost bits of research or recommendations for teachers who are working remotely, Carla?
Okay, so I think it's really important that when we use our keyboards a lot, we tend to kind of engage in a different way. And there's actually quite a bit of research out there that sort of says that if you write something, you kind of tend to remember it better than if you type something. Right. And research is kind of coming from different corners. So the use of pens and digital pens is obviously a good tool to sort of adopt in learning rather than just relying on the keyboard. Because, the keyboard was also invented to speed up your writing. And so you tend to write much faster, which means that you think less about what you're writing if you're not careful. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight here as well is that the motor skills. again, you know, it's quite tricky to sort of develop your motor skills properly if you only use a keyboard. And there's actually quite a lot of findings if you look at the medical professions and surgeons who's starting to complain when they get young students that the students haven't actually got enough dexterity and fine dexterity to kind of use the surgical tools, because they've actually been doing too much writing and using too much keyboard activity and mouse activity rather than using writing and developing their motor skills with the use of pens, whether they're digital or analog pens, but not enough pen writing or pencil writing. So, which is why a lot of surgeons now also start doing quite a lot of gameplay using the console controllers, because your movements are very, very fast, but also very, very small. So motor skills, sort of transfer of what you're learning to sort of memory and sort of reflection on what you're learning whilst you're writing is obviously much higher than when you're just typing. And so we have to be careful and mindful that we make sure that we put enough emphasis on writing with pens or pencils,
whether they're handwriting and that fine motor skill movement. I've been using voice technology for a good decade, and you know, the words on the screen, the kind of lack of, you know, grammar, and where you got the automated spell check as well. You know, there's pros and cons, but I think that's a really important point, Carla. Is there any final recommendations for teachers in terms of where to go and find out a little bit more about some of the things you've mentioned?
Yeah, there's quite a few research papers out there. There's more people looking into it. There's a professor at Imperial College, surgeon professor, who's been quite verbal about it. So there are various articles around. I mean, I can't sort of quote the papers as I'm sitting here, but if anybody wants to find out more, just give me a shout, and I'll make sure I get it to you.
Everyone's biographies and the resources as well. So in a moment, everybody, I'm going to activate a little poll, because you can win a Wacom One device, but we'll do that in a moment. I just thought I'd sow the seed. I'm just going to come to Carla and James. What do you think is going to stay post-pandemic? I guess that remote teaching, online kind of technology. James, I'll come to you first.
What's going to stay? I was thinking about this. I think that things that are going to stay post-pandemic are the things that schools have used that make life more efficient. And I know that we're talking about being in the classroom, but I think that it's important to recognise that technology has a massive impact in schools across the board, and it's not just in the classroom. So I build the timetable at school. I do option, so that students who are choosing their GCSEs and A-levels, and they used to bring in a piece of paper, they got a printed booklet, they took it home, they filled it in, they brought it back into school. Me, had to fill it in on the system to process their results. Now we use an online system, they get sent a link, they do it at home with their parents, who confirm it, and then as soon as it closes, I can start the process of building the option blocks, and then I give them to my amazing timetabler who works her magic in getting that into the curriculum. So things like that, where we're driving efficiencies to give us more time to do the teaching, to do the assessment, I think they're going to stay. We've also been using online parents' evenings, and there's some great software out there that we use that actually cuts off the teacher from talking after the 5 minutes or however long the time is, which seems a bit brutal, but the parents love it because they can be at home, they can be at work, they can join from different locations into the meeting with 1, 2 or 3 teachers, have the conversation. There's no waiting around, there's no queuing up for the teacher who always talks too long, which is probably me. And so things like that are going to make the administration of teaching and administration of schools easier and quicker, so that more time and more focus and more budget can be spent on the actual teaching and learning, which is the purpose of a school itself.
Okay. Thank you, James. That was really, you know, I've been the parent on both sides and certainly experienced that virtual parents' evening. Carla, I could ask you to put your governor's hat on and think about post-pandemic. benefits for schools, parents, pupils, teachers. Could I get you to maybe zoom in from a governance perspective?
Yes, I think parent engagement is definitely going to sort of stay and be sort of much more active than it may have been. And then also, I think there's a desire amongst teachers and the kids, even if their experience might not have been absolutely fantastic with technology, they want to learn more about how to use this in their learning and their teaching. So I think that there will be a desire to sort of continue using it and to discover how you can use it better.
Thank you, Carla and James. I'm going to bring in Maryellen. Maryellen, I'm quite interested in maybe what constitutes the hallmarks of a great online course. I know this is a big question and we don't have a lot of time, but could you maybe just help everyone else if we're designing a course, you know, for primary kids or secondary schools? What should we do? What should we consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the great debate now that has been really what everyone has been talking about. Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? And I don't think it's really about the mode. I think it's really about trying to follow the science of learning that Carla mentioned earlier, that if you think about spacing and the evidence that when students are testing themselves regularly, that's better. So having more formative assessments where students are always checking in with their learning and not necessarily high stakes exams, that's better for learning, and really trying to think about all those principles and then check with how you're designing the class, whether it's in person or online, and are you incorporating those pieces. So you can have, you know, really well designed asynchronous, and you can have really you know, well-designed synchronous experiences, but really talking to students for an hour straight without interaction and without engagement, then they're not going to get much out of the experience, just the same as if we listen to someone talk an hour straight and not having us check our learning as we're experiencing that learning experience in some talk. So really just trying to follow as many of those principles as possible, you know, and all the other more technical aspects are important, but really if we want to think about teaching and learning, really trying to bring those in.
Thank you, Maryellen. So I guess the research, you know, and the retrieval, the spacing, developing schema, you know, that asynchronous and synchronous aspect, it all makes I guess it's transferable in some respects, and we know that there's a lot of nuance where we'll need to interpret different methods. Deanna, I'm going to bring you in a moment, and I know you said you're a Google school, and I'd like to ask you, what does a good digital classroom look like? But before you answer that, I'm going to activate our first survey, everyone. So I'm going to press a button on my side. And the question is, do you need a battery for a Wacom digital pen? And I'm lucky enough to have a couple of Wacom devices on my table. And although I need to practice them more, the last 12 months, I've had lots of practice. So I've activated that survey. Fingers crossed it should appear on your screen very shortly. While that happens, and I'll close the survey in about 5 or 10 minutes. Deanna, Google Classroom School, what does a good digital classroom look like? What kind of resources do you need?
I think really being organized, so having all of your digital components, number one, work, and you want them organized in a way. We have, you know, basically tags on them, so they're organized by different subjects and due dates, which are, you know, the more logistical things. But I think also a mix of not just having the kids, not just giving them assignments to here, okay, read this and take a test. I think a lot of the tools that we use now in our digital classrooms incorporate different types of media. So whether that's, you know, a video or, you know, a clip of some kind, or creating some kind of content. So whether that's, you know, a digital comic, or if they're creating a podcast, or they're creating a video reflection of what they just learned, or adding on to some other kind of component that their classmate had, you know, posted. I think the constant collaboration communication enhances just the overall feel for the classroom and the environment. So I think just obviously being organized, time constraints, and then just delivering instruction in a multitude of ways for the students not to just kind of get bored with how they're learning. So it's, there are so many resources out there that they can utilize, and that as schools we have access to. But I think just giving them, the authentic learning experiences, but also having the buy-in for this from the students to say, okay, well, this is what I'm learning, and I want to do this because it's fun, and I can work with my friend and learn about this topic. And kind of as a teacher, seeing how their overall attitude and learning and knowledge base increases because of the different ways that you're delivering material or giving them access to it.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Deanna, kids are becoming more organised, they're sending emails. Without putting Wacom words in your mouth, is there any particular technology or apps or bits of software that you have been your go-to? Obviously Google Classroom is going to be your kind of main infrastructure, I suppose, but what's been an app that's been essential for you as a teacher?
I mean, like I said, we're definitely using all kinds of the resources that were pushed out by Google a few years ago, and then obviously they've enhanced them. But the students use Google Calendar and Google Meet and Google Keep, which are like digital stickies. So they do that. They organize colored stickies on their screen that they have access to, almost like, a checklist. So it's useful for different content areas. Because everything is just synced in the same place. So for ease of just finding things, it's for their age, it's that's useful. But then I think anything that really allows them to collaborate and see in real time any kind of results. So I know, if I can, say we use like Kahoot and Quizlet, which are, live quiz type assessment tools that it's almost game based. So I think a lot of the the educational tech companies made a big transition in having interactives for students to be engaged with while they're on their devices, and something like Padlet, where it basically allows kids to post in one visual space. I think that's the biggest thing too, is having like I said before, having different ways to deliver material, but also having different ways for students to show their learning. So like you want them to be able to have videos that they're watching, but also creating videos or creating different kinds of content, or finding things, or making these mixing the visuals with written, because I think so much of what students consume now is visual. So I think having them show their learning using a visual medium is also going to enhance their learning as well.
The types of media, I think, is the kind of message I've picked up from Deanna there, everybody. 4-year-olds, 16-year-olds, physical education lesson, maths, media studies, suddenly all the different subjects, the types of media, the types of resources that you have, suddenly the teaching we know is a complex scenario in its own right. How we do this online is equally challenging and interesting. Just a reminder, I'm going to close the survey after my next question. So the question is, do you need a battery for a Wacom digital pen? Yes or no? Quite simply, we'll pick out our winner, who will be picked from those correct answers. So you need to get the answer correct. And I have got a Wacom on the table, and it's a fantastic tool. And I, as a design and technology teacher, it's been brilliant for me to do some creative doodles and sketches. So we'll do that later, and also signpost some resources and support that you can have from Wacom also. And Kieran, I'd like to bring you in here. From a higher education perspective, you've talked about the transition, the hurdles, the 7 hours teaching. What's the potential now in that university environment for you in the context of Dubai, for you going forward? And you mentioned that we might be in this lockdown in your part of the world, perhaps, and probably globally, for a number of months, to come, at least, I suspect. What's the potential?
See, the thing is that we as a universities or the universities across this region is seeing this as a great opportunity. They were not used to online education, like especially our university, the last couple of intakes, we had a very good intake because we got a lot of students who probably couldn't attend the class because of the distance where they live and where the colleges were. I think they start enrolling, thinking it's a great opportunity because they can work from home and study from home, and they can continue and do their graduation. So this most of the universities here seeing this as an opportunity. So we also have an action plan to have to have a blended learning model, so that certain classes we can have online and certain classes can be physical going forward, and to even open a new stream of online itself. So to get the students which are not part of, which ideally might not be coming to our university. So it becomes like an additional income or revenue for the universities itself. As you know, when the organization was moving from a normal mode to an online mode, there's a lot of investment was made into the whole system, whether it is licenses, whether in the infrastructure, the server, the memory. Then every faculty has been trained, everybody was given laptops and infrastructure. So a lot of investment has been put in, which the universities don't want to, or especially our higher education doesn't want to go as waste. Faculties are trained, so why don't make use of the whole scenario? So what they're looking at it is that the prediction, or what's going to happen is, one, blended learning will be dramatically increased. Because you can have the synchronized and the synchronized mode of learning using the blended learning platform. So this will give flexibility. It will increase the attendance, or somebody who cannot attend a class can attend through online. So we are debating on multiple models. Can we have 70% on offline, 30% online once Corona gets over, or can we have a smart classroom where the classes can be online and offline? So the flexibility is more with the students. If they can't attend physical, they can be online. So everything runs smooth. And the second, online education is going to be a strategic priority for every higher education institutions. So that will again, because this is going to be after post-COVID, we are going to see that an online as a new stream of education. A lot of doubts were there in the minds of people before the COVID, that online education, is it good? Is it recognized? Whether it can be accredited and stuff like that. But when everybody went online and online became the only mode of learning, and we also have students who graduated during this particular phase, and we see most of the higher education and the Ministry of Education accredited and this degree. So now people had that initial fear of whether online is good or bad. That's gone. So now most students are open for online education. And what we are seeing is an opportunity, because a lot of people who are in the working environment who never could come to a normal classroom and study. So we see a new set of people ready to come and join this academy, especially in higher education. So I don't know about the schools, but for higher education, online is going to stay. It is going to be a new revenue model. And that's going to what's a great opportunity, what we see in this part of the world.
Now, we know MOOCs have been around for a good 2 or 3 decades, perhaps, at least. Maybe Maryellen or Carla will correct me. But, I'm studying for my doctorate at the University of Cambridge. In my second year, when someone couldn't attend, they connected online, but it was very clunky and not necessarily well supported. But the last year, all my studies and seminars have been remotely. And for how long? And you mentioned a very good point about designing courses. Back to Maryellen's point there about, the blended learning, the synchronous, asynchronous model potentially will be the future of most university courses. Dare I say schools? Who knows? I'm going to close the survey, everyone. So this is your last chance. If you've not voted, I can see the number of votes. So this is your chance to win a Wacom One device. I'm just going to have another big question to Maryellen and James. Do you see the digital classrooms, remote teaching as vital elements to the future of education? So I'm reminded of the Global Teacher Prize conference I went to a couple of years ago, and the theme was 2030. And we're not far away from that now. And in some respects, the pandemic might have speeded things up a little bit. So the question is, digital learning, remote teaching, the future, how important is what we've just been through going to see us in kind of good stead for the future? So Maryellen first.
Yeah, I think the digital classroom's here to stay, and just more people are going to be okay with it and acceptable of it, like we've just discussed. So I think on campus, we have some, one example is a course that we ran this past year about COVID-19. So one of the reasons I said global access earlier is because we were able to bring in speakers of researchers working on COVID-19 and bring those people in for a discussion in an MIT course. And then we also shared those videos with the world so that others can learn from that experience as well. But that sort of course, we're bringing in experts who really are so busy and they can't come for a campus visit to do something in person. Then we're able to have them jump in for an hour, and we hope to run that course again in the fall and really keep it in a remote format and being able to run that way. I think now, I mentioned we transitioned our LMS, and that's really a benefit of the pandemic year, is that we're already discussing that transition before, and our learning management system now, we have almost everyone in our department, at least, and across MIT, it's in the 80s or 90% have transitioned to the new learning management system. But if we proposed that and that launched in normal times, before the pandemic, that would have easily taken 5-6 years. So a lot of things have sped up in this past year.
What's been the issue with the 10% transitioning over? Training, the access to technology?
Well, I think for a few people in our department, they were just older and then more hesitant. They're like, no, it's like already too overwhelming to try to think about teaching with Zoom. I can't think about that as well. But I think at MIT too, one other thing is just everybody is allowed to do what they want. There's not like you have to use this LMS for everyone. So there are custom LMSs that people use around MIT as well.
Thank you, Maryellen. Really fascinating, the transition and that, the Achilles heel of, some people were a bit hesitant, reluctant, or fearful. It's probably resonant to most people in many organizations. James, from a secondary school perspective, with working with young students, the future of schools, I'm going to maybe finish in a moment about the future of education and the notion of a school building. But remote teaching, digital classrooms, what's been the kind of vital elements for kids? You mentioned earlier, they've learned the skills, they can access the technology, organize themselves. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think one of the key things, the dividend was a phrase that I heard at one of our remote governors meetings, actually, a couple of weeks ago. But one of the benefits, I think, is the idea of collaboration. And Maryellen mentioned this with getting remote speakers into schools, but I think there's also opportunities to have collaboration between schools. And we're part of the Girls' Day School Trust, and it's something that we're looking at as to, for those small subjects, the specialist subjects, the Latin, the Greek, the history of art at A-level, where you don't have big cohorts, what opportunities are there to tie two schools in different parts of the country together to deliver some online lessons? And there are a whole number of challenges around it, but we're thinking about that, and we're having those discussions that we haven't had before in the past. So I think that there's opportunities there for us to be thinking more about education and less about physical school spaces. How do we incentivize those learners? How do we get them on board? And I also think with exams and teacher assessed grades happening this year, and the way that we have to do that, the evidence that we have to provide to support the judgments that teachers are making that go to the exam boards, there's a whole kind of bureaucracy around the back of the exam process that technology is enabling. And so it gives the opportunity to think wider about student portfolios. And is there a better or a different way to collect evidence from students in a very easy way over a period of time that can then be moderated by exam boards, given to people to arrive at the grade rather than just going back So I think there's lots of things that we have an opportunity to think about and to kind of reframe our perspective of it. And if we don't do it now, we had a student seminar on one of my geography classes today, and the student was talking about the opportunities that we have as a result of COVID to reassess green economy. And she left me thinking with this phrase that she said, and this is an 18-year-old student, it made me ponder this. If we don't do it now, when are we ever going to do it? Yes. So we have an opportunity, let's not squander it.
So, when now? So thank you, James and Maryellen. I'm going to go in reverse order this time. So I'm going to come to Deanna in a moment, but I'm going to also close the survey so I can see another couple of votes that have come in. So I'm going to close that opportunity to win a device. Now, the big question for all of you is the future of education, that vision. And I've always been fascinated by the notion of a school organisation. What makes a school, college, university environment, the culture? Does it require physical bricks and mortar? I'm sure we've all had that question or thought at some point in our life. So I guess more important than ever, in a pandemic and working remotely, and yes, the mental health and the physical contact, that social emotional aspect of learning we all need. So my question, Deanna, first is, what do you envisage as the future of education, 5-10 years ahead? And what are you optimistic about, I suppose?
So I think there's benefits to both, like what you were saying, the brick and mortar versus the online learning. Really, I think the future of education, I think what we're going to keep from all that we've learned in the last year is the self-direction in learning, and that we're all human, and we're teaching the entire, person or the entire student, and not just delivering information and content. And so I think with having them learn new information, we also have to keep in mind that the rise in social emotional learning and just mindfulness and keeping aware with different environments affect how we learn and what we go through. So I think just in the future of education in general, the ability to be aware and kind of integrate our well-being with achievement and learning and growth, that's going to be something that I think we see in the future, that's more integrated into a traditional curriculum. Of course, going off of what a couple others said, the idea of collaborating with different countries or different schools within the same time zone, really, because of the access to technology and the resources that we have. So your world is not just your town that you live in; it is vastly expanded. So just the idea of integrating teaching the whole student, and just a variety of ways to learn, but then also having students kind of, infuse their own passions into learning so that they can, just go forward with doing something that they love. So really, like, kind of just remembering that we are, teaching human beings, and, we can always grow from what we are. So just, just realizing the pandemic and, kind of melding everything together, so that we learn and teach the whole child.
Thank you, Deanna. Message, the whole child, that well-being. We know that the discourse of mental health is huge. I often think about how far away we are from the mindfulness, the well-being really being the difference to people long-term outcomes rather than just that exam score. Kieran, over to you. I'm conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left, everybody. Kieran, could you, your hopes, your vision, where are we going to be 5-10 years? What do you think is going to, what school and education, at least the university world? You've mentioned the online context. Any kind of final conclusions?
I think the education system has been going the same way for quite a long period of time. I think, it just been having a little bit of a smart classroom. That was the only change which I have seen majorly happening. But I think the next 5 years to 7 years going to see a dramatic change in the way the education or teaching and learning is going to happen, whether it is in the school level or whether it is going to be in the college level. So digitalization is going to change because a lot of data and maybe the use of AI and virtual reality is going to really take a center stage when it comes to learning. Globalization is going to be other major growth factor. We see that in industries, but it's going to happen in education. A lot of like our universities right now collaborating with universities in Singapore, US, and UK. So where we are going to offer a joint degree programs. I think the convenience of online and digitalization is helping that. So students can get multiple university degrees, which they could otherwise never could do that. They might not be able to leave their country and go to maybe US or any other part of the world to continue their studies. But that's going to be a 100% things going to happen. So digitalization, technology, globalization of education, and then a lifelong learning. I think that something is going to be the key, because jobs are getting changed. A lot of jobs are losing its trend, and new set of jobs are getting created, and not necessarily people who are in the work environment is already having the necessary soft and hard skill to perform those tasks. So and because the technology is going to take quite a lot of jobs, so that means you need to keep learning to adapt as well as to manage those technology within the office environment. So people are going to learn lifelong. And are they going to come to a campus and study at the age of 50 or 55? No. So that means the digital is going to, or online is going to stay. But we are going to see a shift in the students. It can be, any age can become a student. So that's going to be the major change. And finally, I will say that it's going to be more student-centric going to be. So what students want, I think the universities and the schools need to adapt. I think that's the key going to be going forward.
I guess the world's our oyster. I could do a PhD based here in England at a university in Dubai without physically attending. So we'll see. Carla, again, I'm conscious of time, everyone, about 5 or 6 minutes. Carla, your wisdom, your experience with EdTech for a large number of years, how do you see it move into the future?
Okay, I think we've got an incredible opportunity. You mentioned the SDG 4 earlier, Ross, and sort of 2030 is actually getting very close. And I think we have to think about that, because what the pandemic has shown us is a kind of inequity and inequality in terms of access and capacity to get onto online learning. And what I think the big opportunities for the future of education is, because of the technology, is that we can enhance, that access to learning, and also, sort of cater better for the SDG 4, bringing education to every child and sort of giving opportunity to every child to become fully fledged learners with lots of learner agency. And I think what I would like to see is that, we get into a future of education where we're much more interconnected. So a child in Africa can learn with a child in the UK or in America, but they have got access to do that. And the rise of mobile technologies will obviously aid with that, and we'll see a lot more mobile delivery of learning. But for me, the big challenge, but equally the big opportunity, is actually catering for that human right. Every child has got a right to education, and digital can really help with that. We just got to want to do it and make it happen. And for me, that's the biggest promise of EdTech overall. And we start thinking beyond the LMS. We start thinking about galvanizing the learners.
Yeah, a really, really important point. Trying to level that playing field. Thank you, Carla, for that important reminder. James, teacher training, your role as a deputy head. How will the future of teacher training look like from your perspective in school with teachers remotely, physically, the benefits, the future of education? Can you maybe give us where you think that dialogue is shifting?
I mean, I think obviously there's going to be a greater emphasis placed on the digital skills of candidates, of people in initial teacher training, and they're going to be required to upskill in those areas. I think it also potentially widens people's access to education. So we might get people applying for teaching who don't live near a university. They might, for example, be able to affiliate with the university but do their teaching practice somewhere else. And one of the big costs for people getting into teaching is the cost of training, the cost of living whilst you're not earning and whilst you're studying. So if they can be living with their parents or living at home but studying in a prestigious establishment, then maybe we'll get more teachers. And you know, it's not a surprise to know that teachers are leaving the profession at the moment, and you know, we need a lot more amazing colleagues and teach with. So I think that there's a great opportunity, as you know, we've all been saying.
Thank you, James. I certainly, you know, my perspective as a teacher trainer, having to have to switch online and just being in contact with teachers from all parts of the globe has been really interesting, and also getting immersed with the kind of topics of remote teaching has been a really interesting perspective. Now, Maryellen, I'm not going to ask you to take out your crystal ball, but thinking about your MOOC design, could you give us, you know, at MIT, what are you working on now that's going to be the technology of tomorrow? Can you give us any kind of insight?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is just really continuing the fundamentals of what's good for students to continue on with. But it's something, it's not my own project, but probably is one of the cool technology sort of things to learn about, is really how people handled virtual labs during this time. And there has been work in that space, but in our mechanical engineering department, really trying to work with creating tablets that were virtual, that people would be putting together in augmented reality so that it can mimic if they were in a lab space, and putting those sort of things together. So that's one example of where I think the pandemic, this project was already happening, but then the pandemic really catapulted that to continue on in those sort of projects as well.
Thank you, Maryellen. So there you have it, folks. What a really interesting discussion. Some fabulous wisdom from teaching colleagues across the globe. So thank you for joining us this evening or this morning, wherever you are. I have to forget we're in a global context here. So we know digital classrooms are here to stay. There's a huge breadth of opportunities, as well as the inequality, which Carla mentioned also. And, you know, digital technology, Carla also made an excellent point about the handwriting and the fine gross motor skills that we need to still teach children, as well as the online benefits. And that schools, colleges, universities, we all need that reliable and future-proof technology for when, you know, something like this catches us off guard. So my name is Ross McGill. I've been your host. It's been a wonderful opportunity to talk with Maryellen, James, Carla, Kieran and Deanna from parts of the world. Just going to reference the Spotlight EdTech for you being part of it, and alongside Wacom and looking at digital devices and that Wacom device. Whether we'll introduce the winner for our device now, I'll soon find out. But if you need to get in touch with Wacom, the representatives and all the kind of email contacts and all the biographies of our guest speakers and any links that we've mentioned, research and resources, we will share and circulate through the kind of ticket channels. So I'm going to bring things to a formal conclusion, and on behalf of my guests who have given me lots of things to think about, you know, that cognitive load theory, me switching off after this event, my brain is buzzing with loads of ideas. So I guess a virtual thank you to you all for watching. A double thank you to my co-speakers here online. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've got lots of food for thought. And as ever, stay safe, look after your mental health and the job that you're all doing in your community to support our children, our parents, our families. You're doing amazing work. So thank you very much. And on my behalf, thank you and goodbye.